start. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to our analytic Tableau user group from October. And we will do like a very short introduction about our TUG. So it's an analytic TUG. We speak about analytic in Tableau, like his name stated. This year it has it took place every month, and it's always around Tableau platform, desktop, server, cloud, or we should change this as data for the new naming, but that's fine.
Ask Data, crikey. We turned Ask Data off in 2020.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes we decide not to change the name because
Salesforce will probably rename it back at some point. Oh, sorry.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's fine. If you want to subscribe to your page, please do so you will be aware of our next event. And you can already, by the way, register for November and December because the event page are already up. So yeah, we had 3 people like running this show: Shimdi, Prasam, and myself. Prasam couldn't be there today because he's doing like a walk in the forest or something. Chimdi, what he said?
He's hiking right now.
Nice.
Let's hope he comes back safe and doesn't encounter any wild animals.
Hopefully he can be there for November. So we will have like a very short presentation of 3 different speakers. So my name is Annabelle Lincoln. I have worked as a Tableau enablement analyst lead. You can currently contact me for hire. I'm a Tableau visionary and Tableau ambassador. I discovered Tableau 10 years ago. And that's it. Apart from the analytic Tableau user group, I also lead an enablement webinar and a Data Plus Women webinar. And I love baking, but Chimdi and Prasam are so far away from me that I cannot share my beautiful cake with them.
We'll pay for shipping.
Yeah, you can. No, you come directly to Europe. I think it will be easier. Then we have Prasam. Prasam is also visionary and ambassador. He started using Tableau in 2020 and is currently working as a manager data visualization at Emirates. And I really love his profile, and he has only 4 visits a day. A fun fact, he likes cats, food, and anime. And then we have you will understand why I say only 4, because then we have Shimdi. Yes.
Right.
More than 15 visits a day.
16 now, 16.
Exactly. He's a freelance and contract data visualization for clients. He's also visionary and ambassador. He also discovered Tableau in 2020, and he co-lead Makeover Monday. And yeah, his portfolio in Tableau Public is awesome. You should really follow him and steal all his good ideas because he has a lot and it's very, very nice. I don't believe that you are attempting to do melody because it's for years that I'm asking you to do some nice melody on the keyboard. I haven't listened to any yet, so
maybe next month. Maybe. Stage fright challenge.
And then we have of course the ground rule. This event is being recorded, so don't worry about that. Just enjoy. If you have you want to say hello and say anything, please use the chat. If you want to ask a question to our nice speaker today, please use the Q&A, which will be easier for us to check afterward. And otherwise, I will let Chimdi introduce the speaker for today.
Awesome. So we've gone through the introduction. Now we're going to bring in our amazing speakers to give us the goodies for today. And first off, we've got Sarah. Sarah is a Tableau consultant who brings creativity, curiosity, and a people-first mindset to every project she gets into. She's had a successful career in advertising, and then she transitioned into analytics in 2020. And she now helps organizations make smart decisions through clear visual storytelling. And since Sarah has entered the data world, She's become a member of the Tableau community and co-leads marketing and market research Tableau user group. And she also mentors emerging talent through the Database Society. Her work has earned her a bunch of visitor days, and that includes what she's here to show us today, her L-shaped bars. And she also has another one, the Ted Lasso themed viz. These are pretty cool. Definitely check them out on her profile. She's known for her positive energy, her collaborative approach, and her passion for helping others grow her data skills. And when Sarah's not building dashboards, you find her experimenting in the kitchen. Maybe Sarah and Annabelle can collaborate on some amazing recipes, maybe. And she's also cheering for her favorite sports teams or dreaming of her next creative side project. And as mentioned before, Sarah's going to show us how to build her L-shaped bars. These are another alternative way of showing information using a special kind of bar chart. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to give us the goodies this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever you are. Over to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here today. I will just, one moment, find my my presentation. And there we go. Doing my screen share. Perfect. Okay, we'll go into slideshow mode. Hopefully you're able to see my slides now. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm Sarah Pallett. I'm a Tableau consultant and Tableau ambassador. As Chimdi mentioned, I am a sports fan. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I grew up watching the Jays and the Leafs with my dad, and I think that's when my love of numbers started and my love of data, talking about sports stats with my dad. About 25 years ago, I moved to Los Angeles and I quickly fell in love with the Dodgers and the Kings. So if anybody's familiar with Major League Baseball, I am in absolute baseball heaven right now because my home team is playing my home away from home team for the World Series.
Oh, yeah.
So it's pretty exciting. I started my career, as Chimdi mentioned, in advertising, and I spent all day long in Excel spreadsheets, managing campaign budgets, tracking campaign performance. We used Excel for negotiating media buys and all that sort of thing. And gosh, I wish I had known about Tableau back then because it is the perfect tool for all of those metrics. I did step away from my career to become a stay-at-home mom. I have two amazing children. Both of them are in college now. Shout out to Matthew and Adelaide. In 2020, I discovered Tableau. Somebody that knows me really well said, hey, you should check out this tool. I think you might like it. And I fell in love with it. And I got my first certification in 2020 and just been loving it ever since. Really enjoy being a consultant and helping people learn Tableau and get the most out of their Tableau dashboards. So very, very passionate about that. Love being a Tableau ambassador. It gives me that platform to help do that and spread Tableau knowledge throughout the community. So I'm here today to talk about L-shaped bars. What are they? Why would you want to use them? And how would you go about building them? So here's a regular bar chart. We're all familiar with this, right? It's a pretty standard component for our dashboards. You've got your headers on the left side there, and the length of the bar represents the value of the measure. And in this example, I've also included the value labels at the end of the line there. So nice and clean, perfectly good viz type, easy to get quick insights. But what if we did a fresh take on that? And what if we converted those regular bars into L-shaped bars? And so here's an example, the exact same data. This is Superstore subcategory. You probably recognize it. And with the L-shaped bar, you still get the length of the bar to give you that the insights into the values. But what we've done here is we've tucked those headers into the corner of the L. So it frees up a bit more space. Saves a bit of space on your dashboard. And also the thinner line just it's less ink on your dashboard, right? So then you have more white space. And white space is really key to help the dashboard user, to help their eyes know where to look, right? And so it just gives these bars a bit more breathing space, and we can really clearly see, you know, our labels and all that. Here's another example. This is Superstore using product names on a bar, and you can see when your headers are really long strings, when there's a lot of characters there and some values are short bars, you can end up with those overlapping labels, which is really not helpful, and you really can't read this, right? And so if I took those same data fields and put them onto an L-shaped bar, you can see that even the longest strings here are easy to read with that header tucked in the corner. And so it's just, you know, a fun take on a regular bar chart, and really has some good practical uses. Here's an example of a dashboard that I built for a demo, and we wanted to include a lot of metrics on this dashboard, and so there's a lot going on here. And so when it came to the bottom left there, when I wanted to show the top 5 markets, I decided this is a perfect use case for those L-shaped bars, because I can have the length of the bar show me the value, but not add a lot more ink onto this dashboard. And in this example, you know, my headers, my market names, they're not particularly long strings, but by tucking it in there in that corner of the L, I was able to also include the rank number as well. And so I think this works really, really nicely here. I just wanted to give a shout out to Workout Wednesday. This visual in the bottom right was actually a Workout Wednesday challenge from 2024. So thank you to Yusuk for this challenge. And for anybody that's not familiar with Workout Wednesday, it's a Tableau community challenge led by members of the Data Fam. And if you're looking to upskill in Tableau, it's amazing. I've used a lot of techniques that I've learned just by completing a Workout Wednesday in real life examples. So highly recommend it. Here's another example of L-shaped bars in the real world. This is Marisa, and she did a Back to Viz Basics challenge, which again is another Tableau community project. And you can see here she's using the L-shaped bars on the right side. And I think this is a really good use case, because there is a lot going on this dashboard, right? We've got a lot of color, there's a lot of ink, but those L-shaped bars give you a nice succinct list, and it looks really, really sharp on this visual. So nice work here. So we've talked a little bit about what they are and why you might want to use them. Let's take a look at how you would build them. So I've boiled it down to 13 easy steps. So your first step is to use measure names and measure values. So what you want to do here is bring measure names onto your filter shelf. And in this case, I'm using Superstore sales. So that's my first measure. And then my second measure is an ad hoc calculation that is max 0. Easy peasy, right? So those are your 2 measures. You want to filter down to just those 2. And then also go ahead and add a copy of measure names to your rows shelf and measure values to your columns. So we've got our base start here. This is our framework. Next up, you want to add the dimension to the view that's going to split your view. And so in this example, I'm using subcategory, and I've brought that in onto the rows shelf, and I've placed that to the left of measure names. Great. Next up, we're ready to start forming this into our L-shaped bars. And so you want to go ahead and change the mark type to a line, and be sure to change the line path style to a step. And once you do that, you'll see the L shape start to take form. And it's basically, right, an L on its side, in case that wasn't obvious. Moving on to step 4, we need to add another axis to our view in order to add our labels properly. So what you want to do here is take that max 0 ad hoc calculation and take a copy of it and add it to your column shelf. And so now you can see I've got measure values and the max 0 fields on my column shelf, and that's giving me 2 axes. There you go. Now, that also gives us another marks card, which is key for our labeling. That's going to come in clutch. So next up, let's convert this into a dual axis, which basically takes those 2 that are side by side and puts them one on top of each other, right? And so you do that by accessing that drop-down menu. And then you also want to be sure to synchronize your axes so that that max 0 line dot that was over here on the right is now lined up with our $0 sales. So you can see how that orange line dot has now moved, and we are all aligned up. So that's a beautiful thing. All right, moving on to step 7 here. This is when we want to start adding our labels. So we want to put our dimension label on the max 0 marks card, on the label card. And I chose to adjust the alignment so that it's middle right. I think that's a good placement, but you could play around with that to suit your preferences. I also wanted to add my values at the end of the line, or the start of the L, if you will. And so to do that, I then accessed the measure values marks card and put some sales on that label. And be sure to only show it on the line end, and make sure it's just the start of the line that's checked. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive. It appears like it's the end of the line, but it really is the start of your L. All right, moving on to step 9. Now we're really just getting into formatting. And so the first thing that I did in terms of formatting was I changed the size of that max 0 line dot. So it was looking larger than my L line. And so I wanted to reduce that size so that it was really seamless with that L. So it looks like one mark. I also wanted to change the color of it again that it would appear seamless. So I did that by accessing that color marks card. And then I decided to make my rows a bit shorter so that my labels, so that accessories, appliances, art were really tucked up in the corner of my L. And so to do that, I just hovered over the line between my rows and dragged up my line. And so that's one way you can adjust the height of your rows. So that's a really great trick right there. Moving into step 11, again, we're doing formatting things, and we're just really cleaning up our viz at this point. I decided to uncheck show header for my subcategory and measure names because we really don't need those. Those are kind of redundant now that we've got our labels inside there. We don't need to display those details. And again, I decided to uncheck show header on my measure values and my max 0 because I have my labels, so I know I can see my values. I don't need my axis for that. And you certainly don't need that max 0 axis. It doesn't add any value, and in fact might be confusing. And then we head into step 13, which is really just formatting preferences. I decided to get rid of the borders. I removed grid lines. I adjusted the font size a little bit just to make it, look visually pleasing. And I really encourage you, don't skip this step because it's the finishing touches that really make a viz sing. So pay attention to these little tweaks that you can make. And there you have it. That's your final viz, our subcategory sales using L-shaped bars. It's a nice, clean look. I also wrote a blog post about this. Go ahead and scan that QR code to read more about it. There's some extra little tips and tricks in there you might like. I would also love to connect with you, so please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lara. It was very, very clear. We had some questions, so let me ask you the question. And if the attendee have more questions, please do so. So the first question is from Jonathan. Who do you want to win the World Series?
Oh my gosh. Well, Toronto is my first love, and they haven't won it in over 30 years. So that would be pretty amazing. But the Dodgers going back to back, right? You got to love them too. So for me, it really is a win-win situation. And I know that sounds middle of the road, but I would be thrilled for Toronto, sad for the Dodgers. I'd be thrilled for the Dodgers and sad for the Jays.
And we have another question about why it is called a L shape.
Yeah, I just thought that was a fun name for it because of the way the bar looks. It's like the letter L. Can I do this and put it on its side? So, yeah.
Yeah, you will see the chat, but some of the people had like new naming ideas. But I like it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people really like it. I'm trying to see if there is another question on the chat. Yes, we will post the link that Sarah mentioned on
Sure.
the chat there, and you will also send it to me so I can send it by email to all the rest of the folk.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, we had a question from David. Just before the last step, you were showing overlap in mark label due to short bars. Is it only fixed to that to reduce font size?
Showing overlap in mark labels. Is the only fix to that? Sure, you could reduce the font size, absolutely, but even then it might not be readable. You can only go so small, right, before you lose the value of that. So yeah, just play around with that, and that might be an option depending on your data.
Okay, so next, let me share my screen again to let's see how I do that. So the infinity windows, I cannot find a way to remove the infinity windows. So
they're cool. I like the infinity windows. They're like a
that's good.
Trippy moment.
Yeah, I saw that because I'm old and I'm not quick enough. So that's fine. So now next we will have Andy. Andy Cotgreave is a globally recognized leader in data communication and literacy. He spent 15 years at Tableau, helping thousands of people improve their data skills. I still remember the first time I met Andy and the first time I see him on stage. I was very, very impressed by him sharing his passion. So I'm very honored each time he comes to our TUG. He's also a co-author in two marvelous books, the big books of Dashboard and the Dashboard That Deliver, that I highly recommend that you read, both of them. And I always say that it's always a good idea to make yourself a little Christmas present and buy one of the database books. He's also write How to Speak Data newsletter. He's a co-host of Chat. Difficult for my French accent to pronounce. And yes, he has been really like a leader in data visualization. So I will let him introduce a little bit about himself. And please, we will also share his wonderful newsletter where you could have a look. And today I present a framework to build dashboard that deliver. And now I will stop sharing my screen.
Hi everybody. Don't go to Gravy Anecdote because I haven't paid for it to be renewed. I will share a newsletter link in a moment. I always have a shiny jacket available just in case, right? This is the Iron Viz 2024 jacket. So hurrah! Anyway, hi everybody. Great to see you all. Annabelle, thank you for having me back at the Analytics TUG, and it's just an absolute joy to be here presenting to you, but no longer as a Tableau employee. Ha ha ha. So let me share my screen and start talking about frameworks for dashboards. Okay. Share screen. Entire screen. I love the comments already. You love the suits, right? Hopefully there's content to back up the shininess of the suits, right? That's always been the goal. So, right. Dashboards that deliver a framework. Don't need to add too much to the intro that Annabelle's just given. But yeah, I've got two books out. Dashboards That Deliver came out. We've just done Chart Chat this morning. That's a monthly nerdy video series where we geek out about chart design, and my newsletter is How to Speak Data. And I am no longer the technical evangelist at Tableau. I don't actually have a new job title yet. I'm trying to work out. I left Tableau partly to promote the book and to think what to do next. So am I going to be a speaker, trainer, advisor? I don't know. You can put in suggested job titles into chat and perhaps I'll adopt them. But Sarah, since Sarah was talking about how we got started in this field, many of you probably know I was a data analyst at the University of Oxford and downloaded Tableau in 2007. So we've been using Tableau for nearly 20 years. But my first collapse into the black hole of love of spreadsheets was way before using Excel, and it was actually using Quattro Pro. So if there are any Quattro Pro memories, please share them here. But I fell in love with this as an undergrad, and I spent a year at this university. Sarah, where is this university? Do you recognize that picture?
Is that U of T?
No, it's not far from Toronto, between Toronto and Montreal. It's Queen's.
Queen's University.
Yeah.
I love it.
In 1993, my mind was blown by Quattro Pro and the early days of the internet, and I was also there the year that the Blue Jays won the World Series, and I learned more about baseball in those 3 months than I had in my entire life leading up to that time. So that was a good year. VisiCalc, Ken, I was a little bit after VisiCalc, but my gosh, Quattro Pro, here I am, largely due to that and the data projects I did at that university. Anyway, but then I became an evangelist and things. So I want to talk about frameworks for dashboards. One of the reasons we wrote the big book of dashboards was to help people understand layouts and design and how dashboards should look. And we wrote that, and then loads of people said, yeah, but what's the process, Andy? How do you build these things? So that's largely what Dashboards That Deliver is all about. And we brought Amanda McCulloch on to help contribute to the book. And she wrote, all the content of the first section is her brainchild. She's amazing. And she came up with this remarkable framework that we've taken inspiration from other places. That is Amanda and our way of building dashboards, whether you're building for a team of one or a team of millions. I'm going to focus on discovery today. If you want to find out more, obviously the whole book is there. We're quite proud of this framework diagram. Steve did get a bit worried that it looks a bit like a Henry Moore sculpture or the Sphinx, but no, it is a framework for dashboard design. I tend not to be able to unsee Henry Moore now I've seen it, so I give that gift to you all as well. Discovery, let me go back, right? A dashboard starts with a spark. At some point in time and space, there will be a question, a request, a hackathon, a random idea that comes to you. I'm walking down the street. I think I need a dashboard, a data application of some sort. That is the spark. And then you need to embark on discovering what that needs to look like. You will prototype ideas, develop the dashboard, and then finally release it. But your process is not dead after release, because you need to get people to use it and adopt it. And then you go around the whole circle again, enhance it, re-release it, or even kill it. You know, dashboards can die. It's fine. That's a valid part of the process we talk about. So I'm going to talk about discovery techniques, and genuinely, this is really things I wish I knew when I was at the University of Oxford. Amanda has taught me so much. One of the things I learned very early, but didn't really fully clarify, was know your audience. I'm sure you've heard that everywhere. Know your audience, know your audience. It's like, okay, but how? How do you know your audience? I failed at this in the past, but now I was starting again. I would have a whole framework. So the first two sections of our framework is discovery, then prototyping. And if you know the Design Council's Double Diamond, you will recognize this. This is inspired by that design framework. And the trick is you realize you need something for your stakeholders. Well, the Double Diamond, the principle behind the Double Diamond is at start, expand outwards as fast as you can to go and speak to users, get insights, brainstorm, ideate, really sort of expand your horizons to fully understand what it is that people need. So that's the first half of discovery. But then you have to narrow down to recognize the scope of the project that fits the strategy you have in your organization, right? So you will have primary requirements. The most important thing users need, and now there's a lot of nuance in that we talk about in the book as well, because it's like, well, who's the most important user? Is it for senior people or more junior people? Is it about profit or efficiency, or is it about understanding business? I mean, I can't fill those gaps in for you, but we talk about how to do that in the book. The next stage, which we're not going to cover today, would then be the prototyping phase. Then you expand out again, and you're going to, do loads and loads of ideas, whether this is wireframing, pencil sketching, playing with to get loads of feed users, and then narrow down to the final vision for the dashboard. So let's talk about discovery, and I'll introduce how it can be hard by just imagining a situation Amanda had found herself in. So let's imagine we're creating a renewable energy dashboard to monitor renewable energy by capacity by region, and to think about policies and how they might have impacts. All right, well, that sounds fine, but we've got to think, well, who's using it? Is it going to be policymakers? Is it going to be the utility providers? Or is it going to be advocacy groups? Right? Even with this simple sentence, each one of those potential user groups might look at even the same data set in a completely different way. So you've got to be out there talking to those users, having human conversations to find out what is the best thing to do. So I'm going to give you 5 discovery techniques in under 17 or let's try and do one every 3 minutes, right? So we'll try and do this in 15 minutes and then go to Q&A. Talk to your users. I'll tell you my own personal story in a minute. Conversations let you hear what people want, what they need, but also where are their pain points. I'm just going to keep emphasizing how I didn't do this when I was at the University of Oxford. I was a hot-headed Tableau pro. Jonathan Drummey remembers Andy Cotgreave emerging on the scene, bombarding the Tableau forums with all my knowledge that we were learning about this brand new tool. But was I paying enough attention to users, or was I being a bit too ego-driven about the skills I was acquiring? It was the latter. Don't be that person. So you've got to think, well, who are all my stakeholders, right? And who might be using dashboards that you are building? Who's going to be using these things every day? Is it your regional staff? Is it the utility providers? Is it the solar energy advocates? Each group is going to bring different constraints, different politics, different needs, different levels of skill, and you have to begin to accommodate all of these. And one really important thing that you must always remember that can be hard in a business environment is not just to listen to the loudest person in the room. I've had to learn over many years. I'm an extroverted guy. I can let my own passions in meetings I can get carried away with those, so I can become the loudest person in the room, and that's not on. That's unfair of me to dominate other people's conversations. And if you encounter that kind of person, you've got to think, well, is Andy right, or can we get the opinions of the quieter people? And again, there are methods to do that, which are out of the sort of scope of this afternoon, but we talk about those a little detail in the book. In a nutshell, there are ways written communications can be a really good way to get opinions of people with quieter voices. When you're having conversations, it's vital also not to ask yes/no questions, because you don't really get a great deal of information from a yes/no questions. Digging into these open-ended questions is fun. It's fun because the best open-ended questions I always find are the ones that create an exquisite feeling of discomfort in your end users, right? Because they sort of go, well, you've asked me this and here's my answer. And then if they can go, so answer X, but I really like Y, that's a really good question, because they're sort of giving you both sides of the fence. So conversations need to be open-ended. What have you got there, Ilya? What would you do next once you have this information? I mean, that's a great example, Ilya, in chat. In fact, I'm going to cover that. In fact, that's almost like a brilliantly planted segue to the next section. Thank you, Ilya. We didn't plan this. You have talked to your users. Now you need to bridge that information, which at this point will be messy interview transcripts, handwritten notes, recorded transcripts. To an extent, AI transcripts can be your friend at this point. We need to transition into user stories. This lets you move from the why do they need this? They've sort of talked about some of their needs and wants and pain points. And a user story, again, this is from Agile and from design principles, and it's really straightforward, but it's really powerful. You are not an audience plant, Ilya. As a stakeholder, I need some kind of information in order to do something. These should be small enough and short enough to fit on an index card, right? So these should be concise things that you can use to show to users, and that also gauge success further down the road. So as a manager in the public utilities committee, I might want to know what share of regions' energy capacity comes from energy in order to, this is vital, identify policy changes and their impact. The third part of this, the in order to, is the hardest to get to in your user story, but it is the most vital one to reach, because I could say, as a Strava exercise nerd, I want to see how many miles I've walked this year. In order to do what, Andy? Right? You know, in order to adapt my training plan to hit some targets, right? A utility provider is going to be trying to project future growth, or the advocate for renewable energy might want to look at the data on current use in order to raise awareness and increase the use of renewable sources. So straight away, you can see that different users are going to have very different stories. One thing I've not tried, but I actually think might be quite useful, is if you have transcripts from a bunch of different users, I wonder if ChatGPT or Claude or other LLMs can actually turn those into the first iterations of user stories. I don't know if anybody has done that or tried it, then please report back. Yeah, and this is the University of Oxford, so this is where I first started building dashboards in anger, and I did not do user stories. I just talked to a couple of users and then read some books by Stephen Few and thought I knew everything I needed to be successful. And it was only after developing a bunch of dashboards that weren't used that I had to go back to the users with my tail between my legs and recognize that while I might be the expert in Tableau and data visualization, I was not the expert in their data. They are the experts in their data. They are the experts in their use case. You might be the expert in visualization. You are both the experts in the end result. So that was a really big learning point for me over my time as a data analyst. Nice Oasis reference, says Anne. I subconsciously made an Oasis reference because I don't know what I said. Jonathan is using LLMs to create user stories. Excellent. That's awesome. Okay, so next we go on to personas. You've talked to your users. You've got this idea of stories. And now you need to go and discover what, sort of categorize your users into different personas so that you can build something and know when you refer back to a persona, you are hitting that person's needs. So it's really helpful. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. So your end users have sort of big picture needs. Your users have 4 categories of facts that we can put on a persona map. There are sort of big picture on the left-hand side, the goals, the fears, frustrations, and then more the data focus side, the how do they do the thing they're trying to do on the right-hand side. And as we build out a persona map, build these as physical slides, right? Real slides. You can print these out, right? So Zane might be an advocate campaign manager. And as we think about what Zane wants, we can talk about her goals and motivations to ensure people have affordable sources of energy. They might be concerned about environmental impacts. And then they use data to understand the current mix of energy sources and create personalized data stories. So these have become the people you are designing for. Again, it can be quite easy to make these up. This is a place where AI can definitely create your personas for you. But I actually think in that case, you're at risk of getting some generalized AI slot version of a persona, which isn't actually something that is your end users. One of the most important things in the framework, one of the things we really emphasize, is that basically go and talk to your users all the time, right? You are trying to bring them along as allies on your project, right? And people like to be involved. So show your stakeholders, your advocates, here is Zane, this is our persona. If you were to be, which bits of Zane reflect you? Again, ask the open-ended question. Because if you start then designing for Zane, but you haven't validated that Zane is the correct persona, you will have missed your end goal. John, you've got a really long, interesting looking comment. I'll come back to that later. Yeah, and create dashboards in anger and create dashboards in yes, don't look back in anger. I get it. That was the Oasis reference. Oh yeah, I just mentioned this. Yeah, make sure you are validating those personas with your end users. All right, journey maps. Now, I'd love to know if there are any people watching who use journey maps, because these were totally new to me before dashboards to deliver, but Amanda has used these a lot. And I totally understand why they're really, really useful. So a dashboard is a part of a journey somebody has as they are going from trying to execute a project, a task, a process to the endpoint, right? And along that path, which would be here on the x-axis, so they start a thing, so maybe it's a campaign, they start here and they finish here. And at some points, they'll be like, I love my data, everything is awesome. And at other points, they'll be like, this sucks. Who built this crappy dashboard? Or where is that goddamn password? So one of the things you can do with your users is work out what is that path. So imagine Zane is doing a campaign to promote renewable energy. And these are the tasks she does. And you get them to evaluate where they feel good and where they feel really frustrated. And these highlight opportunities for you to solve pain points for that person. This could be where the better dashboard needs to exist in the process. So for example, if Zane doesn't like the key messages for region materials, it's like, well, what's going on? Why is that the pain point? This is a really good part of discovery because it might be really attractive. You might think, I just want to build a dashboard about target regions with favorable environments, because you might be motivated to do that. But it's like, well, Zane's already happy with that process. So you're not really going to solve her problem. But here are your opportunities to hit some sweet spots. Finally, compare groups. This is another one that was new to me. But again, looking back at the University of Oxford, I so get this. Quantify the different needs and wants of the personas who will be using your dashboard across criteria that we think these are good ones. So what is your audience's data literacy level? Do they want stories or numbers? Are they domain experts or not? Are they time poor, or will they hang out with your dashboards or your applications and read them? And do they need high level or granular data? So as you then go to all of your user groups, you might find, well, the utility managers look like this. The utility company people look like this. And the renewable energy advocates look like this. And then suddenly you will find you have different clusters or isolated people, right? So if your results look like item A, then everyone's clustered. So you go, hooray, happy days. One dashboard will rule them all. And that's a Lord of the Rings reference. You might find you've got two clusters, but one group is totally an outlier. So you're probably going to need, the green people in this example aren't going to use the dashboard for the bluer categories, or they're all over the place. In which case, it's like, well, do you need 3 different dashboards? And then these are really good ways of clarifying this. So in this example, the utility company group are really distinct. I'll show you this example. This one's from one of my favorite dashboards from the Big Book of Dashboards. And it shows patients. It's for ward nurses in hospitals in the UK. And this was by Simon Beaumont when he was at the Southern Health NHS Trust. Each row represents a patient in the ward, and each dot represents an interaction with the health teams before they were admitted to hospital. So the red dot shows when they were admitted to hospital. So this patient has been seen daily for months. This patient has been seen like once a month and then increasingly often and is now in hospital, right? Now, I absolutely love this dashboard because it is very granular. It doesn't show anything about the overall running of the hospital. And some people said, oh, it can't be a dashboard because it doesn't show, there's no KPIs about the hospital efficiency. And I think it's really important to recognize that, no, this is a dashboard for users who need to understand detailed information about their patients in order to come up with a health plan to get them out of hospital as efficiently as possible. So a ward nurse needs granular information. They can spend time understanding this data in order to get a picture of their patients before they go and meet them on their ward rounds. If you think about the person running the hospital, well, of course, this dashboard's totally useless for that person. The person running the hospital has to see overall efficiency figures and patient figures in order to maximize return on investment in the hospital, right? So if you consider what the persona maps for these two would have been, they would have been for a ward nurse or a person running a hospital, they would have been entirely different. And in fact, another shout out to Jonathan. He had a dashboard in the Big Book of Dashboards, which was also for healthcare professionals. And that was, again, very much at the practitioner level. So there you go. That is 5 rapid fire ways of thinking about discovery. All of those things you have built. If you have built a user story or a journey map or a persona slide, you can use those to validate your progress as you go through the dashboard development process. Is Zane going to be happy with this dashboard? And then you can go and check with users and you can iterate. They're living documents, not just dusty deliverables. So there you go. That is 20 minutes on the discovery part of the framework. And I'll just leave with one last point that, so I've got two more slides. One of the things we also recognized, and I'm sure many of you realize as well, is that any tools you have apply differently depending on the size and scope of your project. So these are 4 scenarios that are in the book. This is my personal Strava dashboard, right? This is built for me, an audience of 1. I'm the designer and user. This is the John Hopkins COVID dashboard, built by a few, looked at by millions, built as we were going, right? Evolved during the explosion of COVID in early 2020, right? Think about, personas and user maps for these 2 projects are entirely different. And then this is a done by a guy called Michael Gathers. He is the data guy for an IndyCar race team. So his race strategy dashboard has an audience of experts. These people know the engineering of cars intimately. Contrast that with this one. This is from NASA. This is in the lobby of the NASA offices in Washington, D.C. It's a 25-foot long wall-sized dashboard designed for lay people who walk into those buildings. So they want the gist of the data. They're not experts, right? And each one of these chapters, we break down how the process works and the toolkits are applied differently across the board. So there you go. I will leave you with discovery should be part of your design process, whether you are 1 or 1 million. You cannot talk to users enough. Make them sick of you. Maybe not. No, don't make them sick of you, but be their friends and they will be your allies and your promoters when you deliver a successful dashboard. And the artifacts you create during discovery process create this great shared understanding of your audience and their requirements. And with that, I will say thank you very much. We have plenty of free resources you can download at dashboardsthatdeliver.com. I would ask if you have bought the book. We would love to see more reviews on Amazon because that helps other people discover the book. But with that, I will say thank you very much and take any questions.
And yes, we have some questions, but before I wanted to tell you that the audience got very creative with your new job title.
Were there some good comment? What should it be?
A visual motivator, for one.
Yes, sounds good.
Inspirational visualist.
Oh, I like that.
And evangelical insight optimizer.
So
I think the last one is my favorite.
You know, I'm sure you all realize I loved having the title evangelist, right? You also know I'm an English guy from the south of England. Well, now living in the south of England. Most English people, when you tell them you're an evangelist, look at you and think you wacky loser, right? It's not a job title that every person gets. So I don't think I can have evangelist in my title for the next 10 years. I'm going to try something else, but I like the idea.
So let me ask you the question. The first question is from Jonathan. For talking to user, how do you recommend getting the time with user in busy organization where they don't have the time?
Yeah, great question. One way to do this is the more senior a sponsor you can find, the more the carrot feels a bit more like a stick. Now that's a terrible way to express it, right? But if you have senior sponsorship for this, then that creates the space. It's like, well, you know, Andy's the CEO. He wants this dashboard, so let's make sure we get it right. I realize that most of you hearing this will go, but in fact, I saw it in comment, but sometimes the senior people won't buy in. If that's the case, you are at a disadvantage, right? Because if the senior people aren't buying in, then you're at a disadvantage. I recommend trying to get them to buy in, right? Yeah, be that little spaniel that keeps chopping at the heels. And I recognize it's not that easy, right? But the more senior sponsorship you can get, the easier that will be to make things trickle down. I remember we had this conversation during the writing process, and it's like, look, you can do surveys, you can ask on Slack, you can do asynchronous ways of seeking this information that will get some information, but the quality of information will be worse. I'm just going to stop answering there and just acknowledge that is a big challenge.
Yeah, indeed. We have another question from Anne. What is your favorite chapter of the book?
Wow, there's many answers to that question. There's one chapter called "What the heck is a dashboard?" Right, and basically this is me just responding to Stephen Few, who wrote about 2,500 words about the big book of dashboards, saying those guys don't know how to define a dashboard and question their ability to talk about and teach about the field. And I was like, oh, thanks, Steve. That's really kind. So that's sort of me addressing him. And some other things. So that was me getting things off my chest. My favorite dashboard chapter is the NASA one, because this dashboard, it's the size of it's a wall, right? And it's got really bad visualizations on it if you care about accurately encoding data. And so it's like, why would we feature a dashboard that's 30 foot long and got crappy charts on it? It's like, because their process identified what their users needed in a crystal clear way. So even though you may never build a dashboard like that, you can learn from that example. So there's that one. I'll also share that not my least favorite chapter, but the hardest chapter to write was we wrote a chapter about AI and analytics and dashboards, and we wrote it. And a week later, it was out of date. So we rewrote it. A week later, it was out of date. We rewrote it. A week later, it was out of date. That kept happening 6 months, and we were just like, all right, freeze. And it's out of date. But there you go. We had to stop somewhere.
I see we have other question. I have, because they are all over the place. So just for me to go through. Yes, Alfia asked a question that I think you answer. If there is a resource site for your new book, and you just tell it that by going to this QR code,
yeah,
she will be able to find resources. Okay.
I'll also, John, one of the last comments there from John, business process, data collection, how it's used. Absolutely right. It's users can tell you lots of things, but they can also tell you things that then become exposed as impossible because your data just doesn't exist, or isn't in the right shape, or has other problems. So, John, absolutely right.
And then we have a question from Alicia. What goes through your mind if your audience can't answer the "in order to" segment of a user story?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, another really great technique is, the 5 whys technique. So, 5 whys. So let's go to the co-founder of Toyota, Mr. Toyota. He basically went, okay, if you want to know what people really want, ask them why 5 times. Well, you want a dashboard about sales? Why? Because I need to sell more. Why? Because I'm measured on my sales. Why are you measured on sales? Right, well, maybe what? And ultimately, you'll get down to, as a salesperson, well, I have a quota in my region that I have to hit based on this selection of customers that I have available to me. You're like, all right, interesting, right? So you've got a selection of customers. What is your quota? Who are your hot or cold leads? And from there, you can get to that root cause. So that's one of many ways you can tease further into that in order to section. It's the hardest bit of the user story.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was, again, a very good presentation. And thank you very much for helping us in this journey by writing such an amazing book. So now I will share my screen again. Usually, yeah, I have like a friend who does that for me. Okay. So I can introduce Jonathan. We will speak about the Tableau Metadata API, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm so happy to have Jonathan here today. I've been chasing him for years, so it's the analytic time. Jonathan is a veteran Tableau expert. He's working as an analytic strategy. It's one of the world's largest Tableau deployments. I'm very curious about that. So it's a Tableau visionary since 2012, when that was probably called Tableau Zen-Master at that time, and is a member of the inaugural Tableau Visionary Hall of Fame. It's very known in the Tableau community, but with this technical knowledge and contribution to Tableau forum, blogs, and trainings. By the way, the Tableau forum will be moved to Trailhead. So please follow the steps to create a Trailhead account to be able to continue the conversation. So that's why I will let Jonathan say a little bit more about himself and today, and share with us his knowledge on that. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining.
Thank you for that intro, Annabelle, and I'm happy to be here. So let's start the screen sharing. Yes, that I was that Jonathan at TC25. And the tips competition. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So going to talk do a quick intro, do a kind of little orientation to the metadata API, and then dive further into details on using the metadata API in practice. So Annabelle did a great intro. In terms of other things in my Tableau resume, I've been a forums ambassador, helped lead or co-lead a couple of different Tableau user groups, and I blog at the Action YouTube channel nowadays. I've been a little behind, but I've got a number of things in process for that. And then another thing that I do when I'm not blogging is I bug Tableau developers. So I take advantage of just a long-standing communication with them. And if you're an ambassador or a visionary in the Tableau community leader, those are ways you can start getting more access and have more influence on Tableau, this tool that we're using. So with that, so my job in what I do is kind of people ask me how to do things they can't figure out how to do in Tableau. When I'm lucky, I can point to someone else's blog post, like what Sarah's done on L-shaped bars, or things Andy has done, or say read dashboards that deliver nowadays, or like do things like that. And then there's other times I have to do something myself. So one of these questions of people wanting to know what's connected to databases, all the tables or columns using, things like that. And then they start wanting to know other things, have different ideas about it and everything, and it just expands and expands. And like I said, my client is a very large Tableau deployment. I tried out different things that were online, and all of them failed because they didn't work at the scale of our Tableau deployment. So some of what we're seeing today is lessons learned from that. So with that, I do have a lot of knowledge about Tableau, and I've written code here and there over the years doing different things, a lot of informed by web searches and nowadays using APIs. So I am not a developer. You're going to see some of my terrible Python code as we talk about this. So hopefully it's useful to you or meeting you where you're at as far as your ability to code. But being able to do this is one of those level ups for working with Tableau. And to that end, we're hiring at Action. This is my one plug. And part of the job would be helping me with my terrible Python code. So with that, going back to this set of questions that we have, so Tableau has multiple APIs. A lot of us have heard about the REST API. So the REST API lets us access content like workbooks, data sources, flows. When you hear me say content, think about that kind of thing. And then there's those administrative objects, users, groups, projects. Sorry, projects were in there twice. My mistake. And the REST API lets us read and write. We can publish workbooks with the REST API. We can update who the owner is of a workbook with the REST API. We can run extracts and so on with the REST API. We use the REST API to authenticate for the metadata API, which then lets us read lots of different attributes of content. Plus there's content that is not in the REST API, like digging into fields, columns, tables, sheets, dashboards, and so on. And we can answer these kind of what goes with what questions a lot more easily with the metadata API. So there's a number of different things we can do with it, like who's using my data. A number of things that we see when we look out there for examples of the REST API are about conforming calculations. So what are the different formulas in use? But we can start even digging deeper, like who's using LODs in our organization and who's not, for example, who's using data blending and so on. Doing a sort of different governance and change management. Like I was working with a team that there's a database update happening next year. If they're renaming a field, what's going to break on that? They want to be able to notify people on that. Cost optimization is one. So for example, if we're using Snowflake, every egress from Snowflake costs money. So who's hitting those tables? Or maybe a team has a small database that they've built, and there's a bunch of extracts happening on that database, and they're running into contention issues on the database where extracts are timing out. Being able to, this is a way we can start querying to find out what is getting queried. And then with supporting LLMs, this is actually a new feature being announced in 2025.3, where the Tableau MCP, they're making it smarter by including more details from the metadata API in the queries for it. And those are things we can do ourselves as we're writing our own LLMs. So lots of things we can do with it. And let's just jump right into a demo here. So I have, I'm logged into my test Tableau Cloud site. If you don't know about this, everybody can get a free Tableau Cloud site for your personal use by becoming a Tableau data dev. So this is mine. And it has features turned on, like I can go into external assets and then query the metadata. And so I already have this open and I have a number of queries running. And then in this, I can start writing a query from scratch. So let's look at all my flows. So I'm going to type in query, all flows, and then I can start typing in flows, and then I can just hit Command Enter since I'm on a Mac to run the query right away, or I can hit the play button here and choose which one I want to write. And there's the flows that are here. And the metadata, the GraphQL tool filled in this object to say what attributes of the object do we want to get. So I can start going flows, I can get the name, and then when I start typing, I can see all sorts of different things here that are part of this. And then I can start filling them in. One shortcut that I will use in this is I'll just use the number 1 because there's no object or field that we can get as number 1. And that's a way to just pop up this to explore everything that's in here. And this sort is by name. Not sharing any tokens here with this. So we're going to talk more about what we're seeing, but you can see down here, I have a more complex one that is pulling the published data sources. And this published data source is all of the published data sources that I have view permissions on. So if I don't have that permission, I'm not going to see published data sources in the results. And you may have to go to a friend who has the access. And then we can start nesting objects and pulling things out here. And this is how we can start getting the what goes with what. So the published data sources, the fields, and then I can do something in my published data sources, for example, and add upstream databases, for example, and put that in. And I put this in wrong and I'm getting an error in my query. If you get a syntax error, sometimes it's nice, sometimes it just gives you bad things. Let me try upstream databases. There we go. So now I'm seeing the upstream databases and I can start querying those. So that's the basics of writing a query. So in kind of breaking apart this query, so there's that query command, which is required. We can name the queries, useful in code that we're writing. You can put in filter criteria in your query. The query can be referring to fields or, and we can rename fields if we want with aliases. And then the query is ultimately referencing objects that have fields. And so it's this nesting of objects that gives us a lot of flexibility. And then in some cases, some of these objects are special that they have what GraphQL calls inline fragments. that you can pull additional data for certain objects. Like when we're looking at a field, it might be a column from our database, or it might be a calculated field that has a formula. So how do we find out more about this? Read the manual. So here, if I click on something in here, I'm getting the manual for that, and then we can start navigating that information. So if I look at fields, for example, so what kind of arguments can we have for fields? And then this is of type field. And now we have a list of the different fields that are here. If they have a data type, it's a field. If it's got a little parentheses, this is a sub-object that we can query that then we can do additional things with that. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the list, this implementations are these fragments that we can get to see these. And sometimes, and there's also a type name that identifies what kind of fragment this is going to have, or what kind of implementation this thing that we're going to look is. So for data sources, for example, they can be embedded or published. Fields can be column fields, calculated fields, bin fields, and so on. And then we can get a sense of all of these. There's lots of things we can pull out of this. Like data category is whether a field, nominal means it's discrete. And then quantitative means it's continuous, for example, whether it's a dimension or a measure, what data type it has. So these are all things that we can pull out from the metadata API. So one of the things with it, we may think we can pull everything out of the metadata API. Like I set up an example here, and I work with people who have this or even more upstream flows and data sources and so on in their data. Now, with the metadata API, upstream means we're going to see kind of go to the left. So where's the source for things? Downstream, we're going to means to look to the right, or what depends on what we're looking at. So if I'm looking at upstream flows for the workbook, this is going to return both flow A and C. Sorry for the typo there. And upstream published data sources for the workbook is going to return B and D, those data sources. And if I do upstream published data sources for D, it's going to return data source B. So there's a dependency on where we are at with what upstream and downstream means that we have to keep track of. And the other thing with this is we can't actually build this in a single query with the metadata API. So the way I think about the metadata API is it'll tell us dependencies, like what's upstream, what's downstream dependencies, but it's not going to be able to build out this full graph unless I attempt to query for what is directly upstream or downstream of something. And we're going to, and the title of the session talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the metadata API. This can get really ugly because of limitations in the metadata API. So one of the things I've slowly been working on and updating here and there is kind of a what goes with what diagram. And I find with a lot of people in using the metadata API, if you don't have a good understanding of Tableau, so for example, I'll be working with a developer who's being told they need to query stuff from Tableau to pull some data, and they don't really have Tableau experience, they have development experience. And then I'm having to educate them about the metadata, about how Tableau assembles content for them to use things. So this is some of where that comes out of. So within workbooks, we have the views that are what users can see, and then there's sheets, dashboards, and stories in our workbooks. The gray means this is something that is not actually in the metadata API. And then workbooks have embedded data sources, which can go out to source data or connect to published data sources. And published data sources our data sources, whether they're published or not, have connections to upstream things, logical tables when we're starting to use relationships or multi-fact analysis. There's fields in our data source. So we can talk about fields in the workbook, but really fields are in the embedded data source in that is an instance of a Tableau data source. And then we have tables and columns. So this is one thing in the metadata API, it distinguishes between columns and fields. Columns are the things in our source data. Fields are what we have in our data sources, like calculated fields, bins, sets, and so on. So those are kind of major parts. Here I'll talk about some others as we go. So in using this, we may think we can always go upstream and downstream in the API and see everything from everything. And I mentioned that we can't do that. So upstream is really what does this object depend on upstream? And then downstream is what depends on the object that we're looking at. So for example, I can pull all custom SQL tables from the data source using a query. So these are when we write a piece of custom SQL that is generating a table of results, which may be referring to tables in my database. So kind of two different table references there. If I look at upstream data sources, the metadata API will happily let me query for it, but it's not going to come up with anything. However, this is one of the challenges with using it. You may run a metadata API query and see nothing because the API wasn't built that way. And then in other cases, it might be you just don't have that configuration in the site that you're querying or what you have access to. I'm seeing a comment here about experimenting with the metadata API and finding documentation around it was really lacking. Yes, totally agree. That's part of me doing this session, is to help do that. As far as where the metadata API is at, it first came out with, I think, 2018.1 or so. Didn't get a lot of attention after that. Then there was a global pandemic, a merger with Salesforce that happened, lots of changes on the Tableau side. From talking with the Tableau devs, they're starting to pick it up again. And a whole driver for that is the VisQL Data Service API and AI. And using Tableau and AI, we need better metadata. We need more access to metadata to do that. So I'd say it's still not great. It will hopefully improve over time. So speaking of that and lack of examples that I mentioned earlier in working at scale. So when we're doing this, like writing commands in the GUI is not going to work for you. You're going to have to start writing code. Some of my Python code here. The Tableau server client Python library has metadata methods, one for running a query, one for running paginated queries. Going to talk about those in a second. My suggestion is test it in your queries in the user interface. Much easier to work with than trying to figure out what broke in your code, because you're not going, all Tableau is going to say when you're running code through the API is that it failed. It's going to not give you less. And also make sure you're validating your results for errors and whether you're getting zero records from things. Because it could be you wrote a perfectly fine query, but slightly messed up a filter condition and it's not returning anything. So you need to be checking for things like that. So when we are querying, like I'm querying using this published data sources object, I can run that query on one site and I get everything and it works great. I can work on another site and I'm going to get this error saying showing partial results. The request exceeded the 20,000 node limit when we're running into that. So when we have that, we need to paginate our queries. And so the API provides for each of the objects, there's a connection object version of it. So here's that original published data sources query. Here's published data sources connection, which adds a couple of things from here. We need to add some variables into the query for pagination. And then we also need this page info section at the bottom so we can properly paginate. This is going to return the first 1,000 by default. I think it can return only up to 1,000 at a time, but then you can paginate to pull everything. So if you have 40,000 views on your site and you want to pull all of them, you can do that in a single query. Then in this connection, it's going to return a nodes object. And that nodes object, you can see in here, I've got the same everything inside of published data sources. So that is where you're doing that. And then there's a total count object or field in here, which is the number of nodes that it's returning for you, which is handy for code because sometimes I will just run this because I want to know how many of something there are. I can do the connection query and get a total count, and I don't have to parse through all the results to count things. So switching back to my Safari here to do a little demo. So here's that data source field info that I'd run earlier. There's that paginated query, and I can run that. Now, one thing to know when I'm doing this pagination here, it doesn't actually have the iteration information. So I'm only getting those first 1,000 things here. I actually need code, calling code that's going to do the pagination to make this work right in here, but otherwise it's the same. So oftentimes I will build out an unpaginated query and then turn it into a paginated query. So some other topics. So let's say we have more than 20,000 databases on our server. And by database in the API here, it is basically a host that we are connecting to. And the metadata API, one of the places where it's not so great is the same. If I'm connecting to jonathan.snowflakecomputing.com, I have 30 instances of that in the metadata API's GraphQL database. So in that way, we can have lots of databases, lots of columns per database, and then we would need to be doing multiple paginations to pulling everything in one query. But Tableau's implementation of the API, as far as I can tell, doesn't support that. So you end up having to break up your queries using code to do that. Another place in the API is that in terms of being able to nest filters in the way we can write like really complicated SQL queries, we can't do that as well in this. And this is also one of the places where I end up using code to do this. And then another piece, if you're using total count, it's not always accurate. Sometimes the number of returned objects in the JSON can be less than the total count. This is a bug I've reported to Tableau on that. So one of the things here when we're doing this, we got to think about performance here. So any of us who've written code, if we have to run a lot of REST API queries, a lot of metadata API queries, it can get really slow to do that. I can return writing queries to return 1,000 different workbooks in the metadata API or REST API is really slow, whereas I can write one SQL query that's super fast. So it's something to think about when we're trying to work at scale. Tableau now has the VisQL Data Service API that we can use to query published data sources. And Tableau has the Admin Insights data source, the Server Insights data source that starts having some of this background information. We can start writing queries on that and start getting faster results on those. If you have Tableau server, I do think the Workgroups PostgreSQL repository is a fantastic resource for large enterprise deployments or even small ones. If you've got some SQL background, because you can do a lot of these queries and speed up your use of the metadata API with that. And then there are things we can't get to from any of the above, and we end up having to inspect the workbook XML or JSON. So one of them, for example, is initial SQL is not available through the metadata API, even though custom SQL is. So if we want to get all our initial SQL, you got to download all your workbooks, all your data sources, all of your prep flows to pull that. So in thinking about choosing the right method, I'm going to refer you back to the prior presentation by Mr. Andy Cotgreave on you're creating an analytic for people. What do people need to see? And that's going to determine what you're doing. So for me in my work, I've probably gone through about 6 different data models with how do I get people what they need, and I'm kind of noodling on a 7th right now. With that, I mentioned the inefficiency of the metadata API. Another piece here is in thinking about performance and larger deployments, do you actually need to pull everything? Talking with different people, anywhere from like 20 to 80% of their data sources embedded or published are coming out of Excel files or CSVs on Box or Google Drive or whatever. Do you actually need to pull lineage for all of those? You may for some use cases, you might not for others. So using these other tools and then querying with a metadata API can be faster. And this part around not everything is available everywhere. So let's spend the rest of our time going into some details. So there are multiple different identifiers in the API to be familiar with. So what the metadata API calls an ID is specific to the metadata API. The REST API might call it an ID or a LUID. And then if you're looking at the Tableau server repository, you'll see an ID that's a number that gets called the viz portal ID in the metadata API, and you can't see it in the REST API. So depending, this is one of the places for me is the audience am I serving? Because if I'm serving other Tableau server admins that have access to the Tableau server repository, they need those viz portal IDs. Whereas if I'm serving somebody who just has the REST API, they're going to need those LUIDs kind of thing. So these IDs, I see people writing queries with names. As soon as names in Tableau are only unique in a project. They're not necessarily unique at a site level or at a server level. Please don't use names for uniqueness. URIs are another thing we can pull out of it. And then path is another one, which is that workbook / view name URL stub. That's only unique to a site. With published data sources, this is a legacy of when Tableau was first built. One data source only had one connection. So when Tableau added the ability to have multiple connections, we ended up with 2 different IDs in here. So there's a viz portal ID, that's the persistent ID of the data source, and a viz portal URL ID, that's what we see in the URL. For those of you who saw my tips battle presentation, I presented on this in the tips battle at TC25. So I'm going to do a little demo of this. So if we look at, so here's the workbook IDs, for example. So there's an ID. So this is the LUID that's for the metadata API. The LUID is the ID for the REST API. You can use the URI to get to the workbook. You can use the Viz Portal URL ID to get to the workbook in here. Data sources, if I look at my published data sources, we can see we have a Viz Portal ID. That's the persistent permanent ID of the data source. And there's the Viz Portal URL ID that changes every time the workbook is, every time the data source is republished. So handing out that is useful. Talking about workbooks. So from the point, this is kind of from the point of view of the metadata API, like we'll use views, sheets, dashboards, workbooks, all interchangeably, often for terminology. Views in the metadata API is what we can see in the sheet list. And then it's got a type name for those fragments for sheets or dashboards. But from this, we can't actually access the sheets or dashboard objects on their own, but there is a dashboards object and a sheets object that we can query in here. And there's a many-to-many relationship between these. So if I'm looking at all, I can have dashboards without sheets. I can have sheets that live on their own, that sheet may be used in multiple dashboards. It might be used in one dashboard, not at all. So lots of different things we can explore with that. There is a parent embedded data sources object that identifies what data sources a sheet is using, and you can use that to detect data blending in practice without having to parse the workbook XML to figure that out, which can be useful information for supporting people in server. There's when we start digging into sheets, we can get into field, or fields in this case means fields in these objects, not the field reference in the API. LUID is a REST API LUID. So if something's been exposed to users, there's going to be a REST API LUID in there, so the REST API can access that. So this means that with the metadata API, we can see unpublished and hidden worksheets. So if you have a Viz and tooltip sheet, you can get the details from that from the metadata API. And then there's a field called index, and I have the term was here. It used to be used, and now it populates null for everything. That was a change in like a 2024.2 release. So I'll do a quick demo of that one. So here's workbook info, do that query. So here's all the views in the workbook. And then starting to look at pulling out dashboards. What's the name? What's the LUID of this? And then for the sheets, this sheet has an empty LUID because this sheet is hidden within the dashboard. So there's a piece here. I'd love to be able to tell like what's a Viz and tooltip sheet versus what's a regular hidden sheet. I haven't been able to figure out a way to find that from the API, but we can at least start pulling details out. So one of the things here is it might get tempting to, well, like, let me pull all the upstream data sources and fields and columns here out of this. And there's to just kind of loop back to this performance piece. If I'm pulling upstream data sources and all of their columns, let's say there's 700 columns in a data source, which happens more than I would like, then every single sheet is going to be pulling another 700 columns out of it. And that can just make for huge queries out of the metadata API that can start running into timing. So part of the art of this is figuring out what is the size query, and then I'll take the data and downstream of my metadata API pull, start joining data together. For data sources, so there's 3 different data source objects. There's data sources is going to pull all data sources. And then we can look at published or embedded in that. There's a published data sources object. there's an embedded data sources object. From embedded data sources, we can identify what their parent is, which is great. What is directly connected to this? Because if we're using that upstream data source, remember, we're going to get everything that's upstream. So then there's this question of like, okay, if I'm looking at flow C, or if I've got a flow that connects to data source D, how to identify what is directly upstream of that? And the metadata API, as far as I can tell, does not let us easily pull that out. That kind of what is immediately upstream or what is directly connected, it wants to give us everything. So what we end up having to do is go from a different API, and I'm going to switch over to my Chrome for that. Sorry. Is that there's an API called database server. And then from database server, when we're getting the like the downstream content, like data sources from it, it is the things directly connected to that database. So we can query it there and then start trying to mash stuff together. So that at least can identify connections, but it's not going to identify what data sources necessarily. So I come from Maine. There's a famous story somebody tells about you can't get there from here. I feel like that in the metadata API regularly. So columns and fields. Columns, like I said earlier, they're columns from the source data. Fields are what we see in the Tableau data source. Hello, Matt. Let's catch up sometime. And like I said earlier, what we're going to see depends on what we're looking at. So if I'm looking at fields for a sheet, that is the fields used in the worksheet and fields that they depend on. But that's not going to include all the fields in the data source and so on. The formulas are being returned as JSON. Another thing with the API is that if a formula has this reference called has user reference is true, which is meaning that you're using username or is member of any of those fields that we use for row level security. Those are not in the metadata API. They've all been excluded from the metadata API, which means if you're trying to find all your data source filters, you can't do it out of this. You have to go to workbook and XML parsing. Hopefully I convinced the Tableau devs, part of my kibitzing the Tableau devs, that this is something that, like, if I've got permissions on the data source that I made, I should be able to pull out this information out of the metadata API. So let's talk custom SQL. So with custom SQL, we can pull custom SQL tables out of the database. Tableau can't parse all of the custom SQL, so it will try to flag to us whether the custom SQL is unsupported or not, which is great. Sometimes we need to reparse that custom SQL by republishing things. So for example, there might be a workbook that was published a couple of years ago. Tableau couldn't parse the SQL in it. You republish the workbook now with updates to Tableau, it'll parse it out. Custom SQL also has this problem of exactly what object did I create this custom SQL table in? Was it in the flow? Was it in the data source? And so on. It gets really tough to find that. There's also no metadata API for initial SQL here. This is getting really nerdy about custom SQL. So just for time, I'm going to skip this one. They're just some of the can't get to things. The part that I want to talk about here is when we're querying custom SQL, we're going to end up with multiple tables in the output when we're looking at tables, because Tableau is going to give us a reference for the custom SQL table results and the tables from the source data that we were querying. So in this case, like if I have data source B that is custom SQL table C that has tables D and E, when I look at the tables, it's going to show me 3 tables. One C for the custom SQL table, D and E from the custom SQL itself. And this is one of the places where it can get confusing, because let's say I have custom SQL that's referring to the users table, and then I'm joining in the users table for something. I'm going to potentially see the users table as part of the custom SQL table and as part of its own reference, and so on. So I've mentioned some of these already as far as things that are not in the metadata API, like initial SQL. The metadata API does not have logical tables and relationships in it. You can use the VizQL data service read metadata API to identify logical tables. And in 2025.3, there's a new get data source model API that actually lets us pull out the what goes with what for relationships and what fields they depend on, which is useful for debugging situations. Connections in data sources. So if, like, let's say for some reason a data source has 2 different connections to the same Snowflake or Oracle instance, the metadata API might just see that as one database, and it doesn't actually have connection names. And that makes, that can make using the metadata API for diagnosing what's going on harder. And then virtual connections are one of those places where it's incomplete for me, that there's the metadata API is not fully properly parsing virtual connections. You can start doing it by doing JSON parsing of what's in the server repository, if you have access to that. So wrapping up, lots of data in the metadata API. That's great, but we can't get everything we need from the available APIs and provided data sources. Sometimes we have to do parsing. And then not being able to really filter in the API, we can get inefficient queries. Plus, like I said, there's different places where there's bugs in that. And then there's all these different things we can do with that. So hope this was helpful to you. Let's go to some questions.
Yes, it was definitely helpful, Jonathan. Thank you very much for sharing all these tips. There is some question on the Q&A, but
okay.
You have
Let's start with those, and then we'll go to
exactly
comments.
some on the on the chat too.
Okay. So GraphQL is the API query language, and GraphQL is an IDE for that. Yes. Sorry, I wasn't clear on that. This is available both on cloud and Tableau server. Where do we get GraphQL? Let me just switch over to my, this is built, the interface here is built into Tableau Cloud or Tableau Server. If you go to external assets, so external assets here, I didn't mention this. This is actually the database metadata of what's on my little tiny cloud instance here. And then there's permissions on this as well. If you want to start limiting access to this, I can also see what are all the tables and objects that are being queried here. This is not the custom SQL table results. This is the source data tables that we're looking at. And then this is all hyperlinked, and I can start clicking into this. And then the query metadata link here actually launches that GraphQL browser. Now, if I go back a second, if you have Tableau catalog turned on or the right cloud license, when I'm looking at my content, So for example, if I go into the samples and I click into Superstore as a workbook here, the lineage tab is actually hitting the metadata API for pulling things. And then we're seeing some of that. What does Tableau think is upstream and downstream for the lineage? So in some cases, I've had people ask questions of stuff and I've been able to point them at this lineage, and they've been able to point and click and get what they need out of it. And if there's a calculation here, like rank over 3, I clicked into that and I can see all those different attributes from the metadata API, including formulas from this. So I think that's the questions that were there. Okay, then let's go to the chat. If you're on server and do not see external access links, check with your admin. Yep, thank you. There's some great examples, yes, at Data Dev Quest. I'm going to share out, I don't have a list of links here. I can share one out afterwards with things. The Data Dev Quest ones are great beginner starting things. If I'm trying to hit the metadata API using Python, do I need to authenticate using REST API? Yes. So you're picking the server and site that you're accessing from your code. So if I go, let me just hit escape here on my presentation and go to my Python code here. So here in this section of the code, let me just hit play on this one. I'm using Tableau Server Client, setting up the authentication within Tableau Server Client. I find it easier than trying to deal with requests. And then once I have that, then I'm actually using the metadata.query or metadata.paginated query in Python in the Tableau Server Client library to run the query. Is there a get custom SQL explain plan method? Plans are done with it. Well, I have two parts to that. One part is if you're querying a database, you want the database to explain the plan. So that's one part. There is no explain plan for hyper data sources, hyper-based data sources or extracts on Tableau. I wish there was one so we could have more information to help us run things faster. Question, does the metadata API give us information about server data sources, like what data sources, flows, workbooks are slowing down the server? This is where we need to go to the REST API or to the other available resources like admin insights, server insights, the Tableau Postgres repository, or the logs. So Tableau server logs, activity log on Tableau Cloud to start getting into those kinds of details. One of the use cases ends up being, how do we merge these things together? So for example, in one of my data sources, I have the information out of the metadata API, and I've joined that into the schedule information from Tableau server, so I can identify what tables are getting hit by what schedules. Resource online to get a list of queries around the filters in a workbook. So as far as what filters are applied for what workbooks, you can get data source filters out of the metadata API, except if they're using user functions or dependent on user functions like username and so on, you can't get those. As far as getting the filters that are in place in a workbook, if through the embedding API, you can pull exposed filter information out of that, but you can't get all the filters from that. And right now there's this gap where the only way to get it is by looking at the workbook TWB file and doing the XML inspection. That's something we've been talking about with the Tableau folks who are working on the AI piece, because when we're using, like let's say we're exposing the VizQL data service API so somebody can query a published data source, people want to have all of the filters that were implemented at the workbook or the view level on that data source. And right now there's this gap of the only way we can get those filters is by downloading the workbook XML, which is a terrible solution. Okay. Any other questions showed up, Annabelle?
I cannot see any other question, but you know where they are all over.
Oh, I'm seeing one more. Is moving away from custom SQL a best practice? I will say yes. One of the reasons for pulling metadata is to identify who is using custom SQL, so you can gently encourage them to do things. Also looking at like custom SQL in a live connection is just a recipe for disaster for performance. And for people who are trying to get smarter about using AI for a semantic layer, for example, we need a consistent and clean and organized semantic layer, and spreading our semantic layer across hundreds of data sources that are each implementing custom SQL is a terrible way to manage things. So being able to pull that out and identify it is a piece of it. And it also becomes an opportunity to think about who might you want to talk with about using your data preparation and semantic layer tools, whether that's Tableau Prep or something like Dataiku or Alteryx or DBT, things like that. Is use the metadata API, find you can actually count how many lines of custom SQL people are using and say, like, everybody who's using more than 50 lines of custom SQL, talk with them and move stuff upstream for that. Okay. Yeah, metadata API queries come back as JSON. You can render them in Tableau. Personally, because that metadata query is generating nested JSON, and you can have many, many to many relationships, my personal preference is come up with what are ultimately logical tables in my Tableau data source to pull things with that, to be able to do that. So like a simple little query, yeah, I can copy the results out, paste it into Tableau and do that. But for operational use in building a dashboard, I really need to think about what's the right combination of queries and data model for pulling the data, and then what's the right combination of manipulation to answer the business questions with that data.
I would say that you have done a very good job, Jonathan, reading and answering the question. So that's helped me a lot.
Thanks.
And the presentation was crystal clear. I wish I learned that like years ago. I always have been using like the repository to try to do my things.
Yep.
But I think that is like
I'll go back and forth, but I'm using the metadata API more and more these days because it's so useful.
So thank you very much for attending this analytic TUG. Our next session will be on the 20th of November. We will have Varun Jain about designing winning dashboards, Jim Denner about fun ways to tackle 6 tough problems, and Chris William exploring the power of Tableau LOD. So I wish to see you soon. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.